entrepreneur, he or she will wonder, how long will the prices continue to rise? And when do I make my decision of either consumption? Do I prepone it? Do I postpone it? Both at a consumer level, at an investor level. So inflation creates a phase of serious uncertainty, which actually in turn dampens the growth prospects, because you're deferring decisions in that phase of uncertainty. So very clearly, high inflation is a bad news for everyone in the country. What happened? Actually, it started off with food inflation. As I told you, the 4 or 5 years of very high growth led to very high per capita incomes. Disposable incomes rose right up to the rural economy level. Why was it? Not just the growth prospects were increasing, but post-Lehman, government had put in a lot of money in the hands of rural people in the form of stimulus. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Rural Employment Guarantee, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee. What did it do? It actually put money in the hands of people through employing them, that is, giving at least 100 days 100 rupees per day for 100 days of the year. It actually increased the purchasing power in the hands of rural people. Second, government also tried to support the farmers by raising the minimum support prices, as they're called MSPs. What are MSPs? Government, for public distribution of food grains, actually procures food grains from the farmers, right? It procures the food grains from the farmers at a specific price predetermined by the government. Now, this price by the government had been continuously raised over last 2 years, because the government did not want the farmers to suffer because of the perceived recession. So quite clearly, minimum support prices raised the floor level of the food grains. What I was giving the farmer as a government, say 12 rupees a kilo, to enhance the benefits to farmers, I started paying him 20 rupees a kilo for that particular food grain, be it rice, wheat, or whatever, right? What happened then? So the floor price from 12 was going up to 20. Add to that the middlemen, the wholesale, the retail chains of pricing. What did it do? The inflation in food started to rise. But more importantly, as you may have heard the Reserve Bank of India Deputy Governor talk on about the protein inflation. With high levels of income, with rural people, the food habits began to change. So it was not just the urban, sophisticated consumer, but even the rural consumer started to spend more income on eggs, meat, fish, exotic fruits, different kinds of vegetables. So his food habits began to change, all right? What happened? Agriculture production did not keep pace with such a dynamic force of rural people consuming more and more of these items. Clearly, there was a supply-demand mismatch, and this became structural. Why? Because supplies were not increasing, because agricultural production was not adjusting itself to the changing pattern of food habits. So we were suddenly caught with a huge demand and a relatively stagnant supply. What happened? You had structural inflation in food items. Okay, that is what is your food inflation. So quite clearly, 2011 saw a sustained high level of food inflation. Now, Reserve Bank of India also talks of, I'm sure you come across this, speak from Reserve Bank, that sustained food prices elevation actually gets translated into broad-based wage spiral. What happens? Take an example at your home. Earlier you were paying your driver maybe 5,000 a month, but the driver, who's probably half of his income goes in food, has begun to spend more and more on food from his 5,000 rupees and is left with very little income for other discretionary spending. If it was a question of 1 or 2 months, he would tide over that uncertainty. But he knows that now food inflation has been high for almost 2 years. He, for the last 2 years, is not able to switch his consumption. So he asks you that, I'm sorry, I can't do with 5,000 bucks. I need a raise in my salary. I need 7,000 bucks. So that is persistent high food inflation translating into wage spiral. Your employees start demanding higher wages. So very clearly, it becomes more broad-based. Your manufacturing sector, your services sector, whoever employs people would actually find their cost of living move up, and therefore would want wages to be adjusted to the latest inflation trend. So very clearly, it was getting more broad-based. demand was increasing, demand was high, because we did not see any laying off of people in a very meaningful way. So demand was high, demand remained unimpaired or undisturbed. So what happened? Inflation began to rise. That was on food. What happened on investment? As I said, Lehman had an impact. Lehman event had an impact on your investment story. Entrepreneurs, because of huge times of uncertainty, did not invest in building more capacities. So supply was crunched. You just go to the airports. Even the newly built, perhaps Bangalore airport, is now under capacity, operating in full capacity, what was perhaps planned for 3 years later. So even the new capacities were not getting adequate to cater to the demand in the economy. So likewise, what happened was, when you are willing to pay, then you're willing to pay a higher price. So when supply remains fixed and demand continues to rise, or supply adjusts very slowly and demand continues to rise very quick, what happens is it has translation on price effect. You are willing to pay more price for the same quantum of services as a population, as an economy. So that leads to what we call in economics as overheating. Okay, that is your overheating. India was getting overheated quite clearly. So it showed that perhaps we did not pay adequate attention to creating adequate infrastructure, to creating adequate supply side, or paying adequate attention or enough attention to the supply side economics. And that is what was the first point of starting of the problem for India in the recent phase of domestic macro adversities that we are facing. So with inflation rising, what does a central bank do? It raises interest to cool off the demand. Okay? Now, it can cool off the demand only up to a point, because whatever is demand-led inflation, it can cool the demand. But what happens if it is food? You and I will definitely consume, perhaps less, but you will still consume. So in economics, you call it elasticity of demand, which does not change much with some change in price. So your demand is inelastic for food, for items of necessities. So what happened then? You continue to consume more, and that part of consumption could not be controlled by Reserve Bank of India, because it was food-led or supply crunch in the food items-led inflation. So RBI could succeed only to the extent of demand-led inflation forces. And that is the common criticism that RBI faces, that what did it do to inflation after 13 rate hikes? Reserve Bank of India since March 2010 raised the interest rates by 375 basis points, or in simple English, by 3.75 percentage points. So quite clearly, interest rates had been raised, but inflation continued to remain and continues to hover at about 9%. So clearly, the problem lies elsewhere, which is, supply side economics. And that is the reason why if we are not able to adjust supply, what happens to growth? High interest rates, high input costs, global economic environment, all have taken a huge toll on the investment story of India. And as a result of which, what has happened? Since last few days, we have seen everyone downcasting their growth forecasts from 8% to 7.5% to now under 7%. So quite clearly, the problem started with inflation, and therefore RBI was perforce. In times of absence of fiscal control, government was forced to spend to provide stimulus. Government did not withdraw much of the stimulus that it had been giving since Lehman collapse. And that you cannot have an expansion of government spending and a contraction of monetary policy. The two need to work at some point in time in tandem, together in same direction, to have the desired impact on demand for funds and therefore on inflation. So quite clearly that was not happening. You had an expansionary fiscal policy and you had a contractionary. When I say contractionary, means interest rates were raised higher and higher to contract demand. So that was the contractionary demand monetary policy, and therefore what we had was high inflation culminating into high interest rates, actually subduing the growth prospects, slowing some of the growth prospects, okay? And what happened? You had a new dimension. Okay, I haven't completed the chain. After the growth prospects having got crunched, what does it do to the government finances? We are not like Eurozone or US, where we depend on foreign savings to finance our budget deficits. Our budget deficit is financed to the extent of almost 97% from domestic sources, be it through the banks, financial institutions, long-term financial institutions, or when you and I put money in PPF and, Kisan Vikas Patras of the world, small savings as they are called. These two big items bridge or cover the fiscal gap. Any developing economy has a fiscal gap. It spends more than it earns more, right? So what are the earnings for the government? The tax revenues, what you and I pay through corporate tax, income tax, or what the businesses pay in terms of excise duties. When you import more, there are customs duties. So all these form part of tax revenues. What are the non-tax revenues? Government owns a whole lot of ownership in different entities, so the profits and dividends are non-tax revenues. And what you have, the recent years, we have seen something called disinvestment. What is disinvestment? It's dilution of government holding. Government may be owning in a particular entity 75% of equity. To bring in resources will dilute that 75% into, say, about 60%. So 15% of dilution of equity to the market, to the non-government entities would be called disinvestment, right? So disinvestment also forms a part of revenue, or on the revenue side, government depends on this. And to bridge the high expenditure, be it on capital spending, on roads, bridges, other infrastructure, and also to pay salaries to the government employees, paying subsidies. I haven't even touched the issue of subsidies, but paying subsidies to the farmers, paying subsidies to the oil companies who sell your diesel, your kerosene, your LPG at a much lower price than what the price you ought to be paying if it is aligned to international prices. The losses are borne some part by the government, some part by IOCs and ONGCs of the world. So you have still a bearing of subsidy. You are paying for cross-subsidizing. You're giving high price on petrol, and you're reducing the price on LPG, kerosene, and what you may have, diesel, and you're cross-subsidizing. So the bottom line is your expenditure is much higher, be it on interest payments on past borrowing, your subsidies, your development expenditure. So the gap is filled, as I said, by market borrowing and by the small savings. Why is fiscal deficit such an issue?